Hey guys, this is Jerry. So a lot of you asked me to talk about Serpentza, and for a while I held off on it because I didn't feel like I had something of substance to talk about his stuff. He represents a specific view in China. He's not very assimilated, but he's been in China long enough. He also has his Chinese wife, so he knows certain nuances of China that people would not get. An analogy I would give for what Serpentza is like is I lived with a Jewish family, an Orthodox Jewish family for 2 months. I lived in their home and talked to them, etc., lived with them. When you live with a Jewish family for 2 months, you kind of see things that you probably would not see if you didn't know them that intimately. So if I made a channel talking about Jewish people, I would probably have very interesting insights that most people who have not lived with the Jewish family would not be able to speak on. That being said, though, I still don't know anything about Jewish people. I might know certain nuances, but it doesn't mean I know Jewish people or the Jewish culture, the Jewish faith, etc. And this analogy is how I would compare Serpentza. He's lived in China for something like 10 years. He's an English teacher. You know, a lot of that stuff is debated, what kind of things he taught, etc. I'm not going to go into it, but he's seen China from the inside, a non-assimilated way, much like when I lived with the Jewish family. I'm not Jewish, right? But I got to live with them. I got to see how they work. So he understands certain nuances, but it's not complete. And that's all I'm going to show with this video. And this video is in response to Serpentza talking about how Chinese people have awful role models throughout their history, and he gave some examples. And what's funny about these examples he gave was that he either glanced over, or I don't think it's because he glanced over, it's because he didn't spend his childhood in China, so he doesn't know some of the stuff that I saw. So our Serpentza, Winston, talked about Sanmao, literally means 3 hairs. It's a kid with only 3 hairs, and it's a comic book that started very early in Chinese history, like modern Chinese history. And it's about this kid who is kind of dealing with the old society of China, and he's also dealing with Japanese invasion of the Chinese mainland. So it's kind of a social commentary, kind of a macabre sort of view into that era of China when China was trying to move out of its old dynastic cycle, and then it was in the warlord era, that horrible era where everyone's fighting, and the Japanese came in, etc. So Winston talked about that, which I would not call Sanmao a role model, though. I don't think anyone looks at Sanmao through the lens of, ooh, yeah, that's a role model I should follow. So, but the fact that Winston knows Sanmao is awesome. Every single person in China knows Sanmao because his comics have been made into short stories, have been made into cartoons, and I wouldn't be surprised. I haven't done my research, but there probably are movies too about Sanmao. So, great on that. I would debate Winston about whether Chinese people regard Sanmao as a role model, but Winston might have not said that. I might have just misremembered. So then Winston talks about Sun Wukong, aka Goku, the Monkey King. Basically, it's based on an old Tang Dynasty legend about this sort of warrior monkey that had special powers, and then he kind of angered the Buddha, and so the Buddha sent him on a mission to protect a monk named Tang Sanzhang and to get him to India, etc., etc. So the Goku, aka Sun Wukong story has been turned into many different cartoons, comic books, movie adaptations, etc. It even went to Japan, right? It's Dragon Ball Z, etc. So that's definitely an interesting case study that Winston presented. Again, I don't think that parents, anyone of authority, is telling kids you should emulate Sun Wukong. You know, Winston mentioned the this thing. A lot of kids think Sun Wukong's cool because, you know, he has the Jinggu Bang, the little pole staff, and he can beat off enemies, and they like to do the monkey, you know, right? The monkey movements, and monkey kung fu is like, you know, that stuff is potentially based on some of those legends, etc. But again, to go the next step and to say, oh yeah, he's a role model for Chinese people. I would have to debate that. I don't think anyone looks at Sun Wukong and is like, oh yeah, I want to be like that. I want to be that silly monkey thing who's scratching my back and always being silly, and I have to be tamed by my master all the time. Who's, I'm part of Sun Wukong. The reason why he's so powerful, why does he listen to this monk who has no kung fu? It's because the monk can do this chant, and Sun Wukong has this thing on his head where if the monk does the chant, it like tightens and gives Sun Wukong a headache. So he's controlled by this guy. The monk's like a really proper dude. He's got Buddhism in him. He's celibate, etc. And he just has one mission, which is go to India, learn more about Buddhism, etc. So Sun Wukong and Chu Bajie, the Pigsy character, all of them are kind of different comedic foils to our Tang Sanzhang, the monk dude. Anyways, so Winston Serpentza mentioned that. And then Winston Serpentza mentioned Leifeng, which is a very interesting, fascinating, mythologicalized, I don't know what the right word is, mythologized character in like Chinese traditions. Basically, he was a soldier. He believed in the communist cause. He really loved China, the way China was in sort of the 50s, the 60s, etc. And he's used as a role model for kids to be like, this is what you got to do. You got to protect the people who are helpless. You got to give away stuff when you can. You got to be a good citizen, etc. Now, that was a good case study that Winston brought up. That being said, though, I think starting in the 2000s, so after I came to America, as the internet started booming, etc., I think fewer and fewer people really believed in the Leifeng legend. So yes, I think Winston is right that people like me, born in the 90s, people born in the 80s, people born in the 70s, 60s, etc., had this Leifeng character, but any younger millennial and any Generation Z just totally knows, and even people like me now, we're just like, yeah, that Leifeng character, he's cool, but he wasn't real, etc. So even that is kind of stretching it, especially when you're talking about modern China and role models. So now's my part to add to this. See, I grew up in the 90s in China, so I got to see other role models that Winston didn't see because he was in South Africa in China. Sorry, I meant he was in South Africa in the 90s. So what are some other role models that every Chinese kid knew and were encouraged to emulate? I'm speaking from experience. I'm speaking from my community. I'm speaking from what the kids in my school, so beyond my community, watched, etc. What elders, so what people, my parents' generation, people who were a generation above my parents, encouraged me to look at. The first role model that Winston doesn't know about, or if he did, maybe he cherry-picked, I don't know, but I'll explain to you guys here, is a guy named Afanti. And I looked up what his name is supposed to be in Turkish because this is a Turkish person. It's basically, think of him as like a really smart dude, and depending on the story, he's working a different job, and he uses his intelligence to get by. And sometimes he's very scheming, and sometimes he actually becomes the butt of the joke. But I mention Afanti because he is not a generically Chinese type of origin, but every Chinese kid knows about him, and nobody is like, oh yeah, we shouldn't learn from this guy because he's Turkic of origin. So basically, what I believe happened was China had very, very long history of interaction with Turkic people. So different types of groups of Central Asians and even people from Turkey, etc., through the Silk Road trade. And the myths, the legends, the morality tales, the allegories of Afanti probably were brought through the Silk Road by either Uyghur Muslims or Hui Muslims or some other kind of Central Asian steppe people who had contact with the Turkish type of people in the Anatolia region. Anyways, so growing up, I distinctly remember kids younger than me were watching these Afanti cartoons because I don't know if it was the first time he was turned into a cartoon. Actually, it wasn't a cartoon. It was like a clay mold type of stop motion thing. but everyone was talking about it, and I wasn't into it because I had just come back from America. I was in America, and then I went back to China. And everyone's like, yeah, dude, you got to see, these little kids are learning from Afanti, man. You this American, you got to drop your American culture. You got to learn from Afanti. So I started watching these Afanti stop motion clay cartoons, and then I even started reading up on some of his tales. And it's hilarious because I think once I tell you some of these Afanti stories, you're going to realize that it kind of represents how Chinese people act, which is whatever I'll do, I'll get by. Whatever kind of roundabout thing I can do to kind of bypass certain restrictions and laws, I'll do. And I'll just kind of game the system. That's how Chinese people are. And I think a lot of it came from the Afanti kind of role model. So, Serpentza, I really wish you talked about Afanti because Afanti represents such a big part of how Chinese people think. And by not bringing in Afanti, you kind of did a disservice. Like, I know Serpentza, I think he's very well-intentioned. He's trying very hard to show people the nuances of China. And we all know Chinese people have a different way of thinking, right? A contract, an agreement, etc. is not always considered a strict thing. Laws, etc. They're not considered strict things in China. That's just how the Chinese brain works. And I think this whole legend of Afanti thing has like helped shape this way of thinking. Anyways, let me give you some really funny stories from Afanti. The most famous one, that the first story of Afanti I heard of was, so he's probably in some kind of sultan's home, like he's one of the lowly janitors or whatever, and then one of the officials that works for the sultan's like, okay, Afanti, you are not a good janitor, you've been slacking, I need you to clean every single streetway or corridor in this palace, and you're going to get your head chopped off unless everything you wipe is completely shiny, and when the sun shines on it, it's not going to dry. So Afanti's kind of like, okay, all right, I see what you're going to do. You want me to die, huh? You're giving me an impossible task. So Afanti thinks about it a little, and then he gets an idea. He takes oil, cooking oil, and he starts just splashing the cooking oil all over the floors and all over the tables and everything, and starts wiping it and wiping everything with cooking oil. So his master, his boss or whatever, comes back. He's like, what are you doing, Afanti? You're not cleaning. Afanti's like, no, but that's exactly the instructions you gave me. And he turns to one of the, the soldiers, the servants accompanying the master or whatever. He's like, right? Is this what he said? So his boss is like, okay, what did I say? So Afanti, with everyone there, he's like, okay, you said you have to clean in a way where it has to be very shiny. Look at the ground. And they look at the ground, and with oil, of course, it's shiny, right? And he's like, did I fulfill that? And his boss is like, I guess you did. And then Afanti says to everyone, you also said to me, you have to make sure that when the sun shines on any area you cleaned, it doesn't dry up the fluid. And Afanti's like, the sun's shining right now, and look at the ground. It's still wet, right? Because again, oil, it's got a different evaporation point than water. And the sultan's like, or the sultan's person that's in charge of Afanti's like, yeah, I guess I said that. So Afanti's like, did I do anything wrong? I followed your instruction better than anyone could. And so he gets away with making his boss the butt of the joke and just completely trolling. Like, Afanti is basically the first example of a troll. And it's hilarious. Maybe you analyze my personality, why I am. Maybe you could give a lot of credit to Afanti, just his way of thinking influenced how I thought. So, that's an example of an Afanti story. How he uses his wits and how he uses wordplay and people's kind of ambiguity to troll them or get what he wants or not get in trouble, etc. It's really funny. And I'll tell you another story. So there was a guy pretending to be Afanti. He's like, no, I'm the real Afanti. And then Afanti's like, no, I'm the real Afanti. So then the camp split into two groups. And the first group basically says, okay, let's do this. Afanti, apparently you're a smart guy. We have some people here who are sick. Let's have you cure them. So the one guy claiming to be Afanti does all this like Arabic magic and cures all these people. And then Afanti's like, huh, I can cure these people, but it's not for my hands, it's for my donkey. And the people are like, what are you talking about? And he's like, oh, let me show you. So he puts a rope on the back of his donkey and he ties it to a pillar, and then he hits the donkey's butt and the donkey starts running and it pulls the pillar down and it kills all these people who are like crippled and sick. And Afanti's like, didn't I just cure them from their misery? I'm serious, that's an Afanti story. And I remember I was watching that, I was like, wow. And then basically the ending to that story was everyone, oh, he was the real Afanti because he was witty. The other guy was just fake magic, fake like voodoo stuff. And I remember I was looking at that and I'm like, are you sure? Like, I was only 8 or 9 at the time. But even then, I had this, remember we talked about prudence in a previous talk? I had this moment of prudence where I'm kind of like, are you sure we should be telling kids that this is the right way? Hey, these people are sick, they're incurable. Let us put them out of their misery by killing them. That's crazy, right? But like, that's an Afanti story. Or another very famous Afanti story. He was, this time he's a barber, and there was some rich, like, sultan-esque type figure who was getting a shave. And so Afanti doesn't like him. So Afanti's like, okay, do you want your eyebrows? And the sultan is like, yeah, of course I want my eyebrows. So he shaves the sultan's eyebrow off and gives it to the sultan. He's like, yeah, here's your eyebrows. You wanted your eyebrows, right? And then, like that's an example of, like, Afanti. And this is like a nuance because, again, this isn't a Chinese character, but like Chinese people all know about him and they've adapted him because it fits the Chinese worldview, which is like, you always use your brain. If something doesn't fit what you want to do, you just try to work your way around it. And I just wish this was explored by Serpentza, but Serpentza doesn't know about this because I don't know if kids nowadays, they look at Afanti, but Afanti was just that, he was like the coolest person back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, etc., and before, right? The myth of Afanti, all his allegory stories have been sort of in the Central Asia, Western Asia, East Asia. They've been there probably for thousands of years. And the Communist Party, etc., hasn't tried to discourage them just because they're of Turkic or Muslim or Arabic origins. So that's an example. That's like something that is such a big part of like the Chinese mythos, the Chinese role model paradigm, but Winston Serpentza never talked about. And another funny story from Afanti, one time, I don't remember how he did it, but he managed to troll all the people around him by burning their clothes. So like all the people had to be naked, and then like the Sultan came and they all got in trouble. Like this is hilarious stuff when you think about it. And now that I'm sharing this with you guys, I kind of want to look up more of these Afanti stories. He was the original troll, man. He was a troll before the word ever came about. He was a troll. He was a multicultural troll, basically, before there was such a thing as multiculturalism. It's crazy. So, of course, we're not just going to talk about Afanti. There's many other role models that have been either subtly pushed on kids in China, or they just managed to become role models because they were just popular. They fit the way the Chinese people thought. A very famous cartoon series that Chinese kids know, they probably know about Sanmao as much as this, shuke与贝塔, shuke and beita. Basically, if you guys have ever been to China, you've probably seen this cartoon, you've seen books, etc., comic books about this character, these two characters, but shuke and beita are two mice who decide they don't want to just be mice, they don't want to steal. all the time and eat other people's food. They want to work for their food. So Shuke becomes a helicopter pilot, and Beita becomes a tank pilot. Tank pilot? A tank driver? I don't know what the professional word for it is. And then they go about, they work for their food, they solve people's problems, etc. It's a very Chinese thing. It's like, okay, well, let's work for everything, right? Like, that's an example. It's like maybe I'm going to talk about Leifeng and all that. In a way, 舒克与贝塔 is kind of like a subtle way of making the kind of Leifeng way of life where you just work very hard, you serve people, making it more accessible for people, for especially kids. And then besides 舒克与贝塔, there's also 黑猫警长, which is this black police cat. And the police cat just keeps order, takes down bad guys, etc. Every kid knows about it. I never liked the 黑猫警长because I just don't do well with authority figures. So the black cat character, I just saw the character on screen, I just was repulsed. But 舒克与贝塔 was pretty cool. And then besides those two cartoons, another very popular cartoon series that of course became books and comic books, etc., were the Huluwa, the Gourd brothers. And basically, the different brothers had different abilities, and eventually they all got synthesized into one super Gourd brother, and then like he took down evil and stuff like that, and protected his, I believe, his grandpa or his uncle or something like that. So like, we got family values in it, but also, okay, we got to take down mysticism and all that. So I'm surprised that Serpentza missed that one because Huluwa is still very popular among people, like kids nowadays in China. And I don't know if Serpentza has a kid with his Chinese wife. I got a feeling he did. Maybe it's the other white dude, the other Guaylo. But if you have a kid in China, you'll know the Huluwa. And again, guys, there's a reason I'm talking about these characters in particular, these three cartoons, besides Afanti. Afanti came from somewhere else. Huluwa, 黑猫警长, 舒克与贝塔, they're all Chinese cartoons. Like, a lot of Japanese anime and stuff came into China in the 80s, 90s, etc., like Serpentza says, but China created its own too. And some of those domestic Chinese cartoons were as popular, if not more popular, than the Japanese stuff. The Japanese stuff was like flashy and stuff like that, but the values of the Chinese stuff fit more into the Chinese paradigm of life. So let's go beyond kind of stuff for kids. Let's talk about stuff for adults. A lot of you know Jinyong, aka Lois Cha, wrote a lot of these cool kind of like mythical kung fu stories. I've actually made videos about Jinyong in the past, but a lot of the characters in Jinyong novels are seen as role models for people. There's this very famous Jinyong novel called 笑傲江湖, which means the wandering, smiling, or wandering proud warrior. And basically, Ling Huchong, the character in it, is like a role model for many people. Other people really want to be like Guo, who is the main character in the Legend of the Condor Heroes, and then he was a supporting character in Return of the Condor Heroes. Basically, this guy, he's always doing the right thing. He might be a little slow, but he's not a dumb person. He sees the big picture and he knows what to do. And there's many other characters from Lois Cha novels that serve as sort of different types of archetypes for people to be. So I've spoken a lot. I don't know how long I've spoken. Wow, it's a 24-minute video. That's pretty cool. The point of my talk is there's a lot of nuance to a country so big and with such a long history as China. Yes, a lot of the culture and the history and the religion got destroyed under communism, and it's so sad, but there's still a lot that remained. And Serpentza has a certain view. He's a guy who's been in China for at least 10 years, and he was a Chinese teacher or English teacher or whatever he taught, and you know, he has his biases, etc., but he definitely doesn't capture the whole picture of what China's like. If he serves an important voice, and by saying that I might piss off some of the 50-cent army that watch my channel, but Serpentza is a very important voice. But I want to encourage every one of you to get more views than just Serpentza. If you only watch Serpentza, you're probably not going to get the whole picture. You're definitely not going to get the whole picture, but you might not even get like a picture that'll help you when you go to China, whether to travel, to study, to do whatever. I encourage all of you to go to China. So, besides watching my channel, which I love you guys, you can watch Nathan Rich. There's some other YouTubers who are more travel oriented, like there's this girl named Blondie in China or something like that, and there's some other very cool, they're Westerners, but they're from different parts of the West, like they might be Australian, etc., or they might be Canadian, etc. So watch all of them, and that way it can give you a nuance on this rising superpower. And on top of that, go to China yourself, man. Go to Japan, go to Korea, etc. Interact with people. That's what I encourage everyone to do on the channel. Really get to know people. Get to know everything. Okay, thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed this talk. And if you've heard of any of these characters that I've talked about, especially the Afanti man, the Afanti character, I spent so much time on him, so you know he's pretty cool in my mind. If you know about the Afanti character, please let me know. And if you guys know what his Arabic name is, let me know too. Okay, thank you guys so much. Talk to you soon.